Okay, I'm going to go to a short clip of Greg Palast here in a moment, investigative reporter for the BBC, from a TV interview I did last night on the Nightly News, and he's going to be back on the radio show live tomorrow, getting into more of this with us. I also have Rosa Corey, who's just an amazing grassroots fighter and expert on Agenda 21. And the reason I like having her on is because when I hear her talking about Agenda 21, I've done all the research separately and can confirm that she knows exactly what she's talking about and is an exciting voice, added to the mix with her experiences as a forensic realtor that fights eminent domain. So she's going to be joining us tomorrow. Nigel Farage, member of the European Union Parliament. He's kind of the Ron Paul of England. He's well known pretty much in that vein and almost as popular. Hasn't been around as long. He's younger, of course. He survived a plane crash and almost died a year and a half ago, but he's back and really having a big effect. The fastest growing party in the UK, and it's spreading to the European Union. He's fighting the open announcements of world government. He's going to be joining us coming up in the last 30 minutes of the show today. Best-selling author James Wesley Rawls of the new novel Survivors is going to be joining us. First time I've ever interviewed him, so I'm looking forward to that coming up in the second hour. Also, we've got new Fast and Furious news, giant news on the terror front. In fact, when I read this type of news, I've got to really, really try to just ask everybody to take a deep breath and listen to me carefully on this information. When you see media hype, when you see government hype about imminent Iranian attacks in America, and the fact that the U.S., Israel, and NATO and England are staging bombings and attacks inside Iran, and you've got the head of the National Security Council, Clapper, calling for provocations with Iran. You've got the history of Cheney, Pulitzer Prize winner Cy Hirsch exposed, wanting to paint up U.S. boats like Iranian speedboats and have Navy SEALs attack U.S. ships 5 years ago. Then that came out about 3.5 years ago once Cheney left office. Cy Hirsch was too scared to publish it until he left office, and I understand why. He's the guy that broke the My Lai massacre, everything else. Again, two-time Pulitzer Prize winner. You can't get any more credible than Cy Hirsch. You've got that going on, and now you've got him hyping, get ready for the Iranian attack. In ABC News, in Associated Press, heightened security in U.S. over Iran threat. And you add to that the U.S. troops massing, the NATO troops massing, all of this going on, all of this unfolding, all of this happening. And then you have the Navy SEALs with Ed Asner telling him that a attack is imminent, a false flag attack that Navy SEALs are telling him is about to happen. And then off record, he even gave me the sources' names and information, and I've called him. I'm playing phone tag right now. You've got all of this going on, all of this happening. I mean, this is the season of false flag. Like I said 2 weeks ago with that big emergency alert, and I said, look for them to start hyping Iranians are going to hit the U.S. Look for them to start hyping this ahead of a new war. They could easily pull off a new 9/11. Say Iran did it. Clamp down on domestic freedoms, deploy the TSA and regular army on the streets. It's all been announced that they're in preparation for. Start shutting down the media, suspending elections. Anything could happen. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but we're in the sights. We're in the crosshairs. We're in the danger zone. This is big time. So I'm going to be breaking that down. It's all unfolding. And so this is certainly white knuckle time right now. Let's go ahead and go to a clip from last night's Nightly News with Greg Palast, where I was bringing up the fact that so much of what he's talked about has now come true. I mean, he was the one saying News Corps was a mafia spying on people and influence peddling and giving sources to the police sources, that the system could then basically go out and go after whistleblowers, all of it. He was a guy who broke down in 2002 the plan by the big banks to implode Europe and then the United States, just like they've done third world countries. He said Argentina, its destruction in 2001, 2000 is the model of what they're going to do here. And it all happened. So I brought this up to him, and this was his response to that last night.
Of saying, yeah, I told you so. I think it is worthwhile because it gives credibility to the material that we did put on before. I should note that I'm a lucky guy in one way. You might not see me on U.S. TV except bless you, Alex, especially on Valentine's Day, then kiss you. But I do have the world's largest news network behind me, putting me on a prime time BBC television. Now, do understand that BBC, when I got the documents from inside the IMF, and now we do see Greece on fire. There's a chapter in Vulture's Picnic called The Generalissimo of Globalization, where I actually have these documents from inside the IMF, World Bank. And because of my position in journalism in Europe, I was actually able to confront personally the Director General of the World Trade Organization and put these inside confidential documents and cables in front of him. That was his opportunity to say, oh, it's all made up, it's a bunch of conspiracy junk. He verified everything. He tried to talk away their meaning, but he verified everything, that I had all the documents I had. When you see Greece on fire, I saw those documents. I also spoke to the inventor of the euro, Bob Mundell, and who said, basically is saying this was in the plan. The idea was he wanted to end, he wanted to make sure that there was a sell-off of all the government properties in Greece, etc. You have to set a fire if you're going to have a fire sale. He thought that this is the best thing that's ever happened. These guys, this was the purpose of the euro. He said he was very upset, he told me, that democracies get to kind of vote on their fiscal and monetary, to have fiscal and monetary control. He wanted to create a mechanism, the euro, which would make elected parliaments and congresses and presidents subservient to an economic formula. And the economic formula is called the 3% rule there. There's a German word which I can't pronounce that they use. But that was the purpose, was to basically create something that would replace democracy. In fact, by the way, I spoke with, because of my position, I get to meet all these heads of state, etc. And I've met with Carlo Monti, the new prime minister of Italy, the new chief of Italy. And Monti, has not been elected. He's just a banker. That's, you don't get to choose anymore.
They call him a technocrat. I mean, even The Economist says it's good to not have countries run themselves. We, the technocrats, will run it now. And as you said years ago when you got to meet, with the head of the organization, the World Trade Organization, they admitted this is how we were going to take over. But then they're the ones that sold the fraudulent debt and got the governments to sign on. They're the ones that actually have most of the debt. And so they do this Svengali judo move where they're set up as our bosses, even though they're the progenitors of it. It's insane.
Yeah. Well, in fact, in the case of Greece, I call it a crime scene. In particular, the Greek government, to stay within the euro, both the so-called socialists and the so-called conservatives there had cut a private deal with Goldman Sachs to hide their true deficits. And this was true most of the countries, but this was particularly done with Goldman Sachs and had to do with trading euros into yen and dollars and back. Technically, on paper, it looked like Goldman Sachs took a multi-billion-dollar loss. Well, Goldman Sachs never takes a deliberate multi-billion-dollar loss. That's nonsense. In fact, it was covered up by a secret agreement to pay them back at massive charges, with massive usurious charges. I mean, you couldn't call it anything else, plus a $500 million fee on top of the massive interest rates that they were collecting, all done in secret. When this came out, of course, then the Greek bond market, the market for Greek bonds, completely collapsed, and people rightly, in a way, asked for massively high interest because, they say we're victims of a fraud. Now, why, someone asked me, actually one of the band members from, if you remember, Dire Straits, asked me, well, how come they weren't arrested? Well, the United States, the Securities Exchange Commission is supposed to arrest the government of Greece, because after all, it was a conspiracy between two governments and Goldman Sachs. And here's the deal. Instead of Goldman being busted, They get money from the European Central Bank. They get totally bailed out. They get fees for handling the bailout, and then their guys take over the country and they buy up the assets of the country, the shipping, the beaches. You know, the
islands. I've seen cases in the news where they owe a brokerage firm that sold them crap $3 billion, so the head of the company goes, I'll take an island personally for $3 billion. I mean, and it's all through fraud. So I guess Madoff's problem and Ken Lay's problem was the frauds weren't big enough and weren't so giant that it'd bring down the whole system. Here's my question for you, and then I want to go back to the news court thing, because people say, hey, you cut him off when you got to the part about CNN. Where is it all headed now with MF Global, where, as you know, the head of the commodities board was the former minion of Corzine. Corzine gets caught in Congress lying. Of course, he ordered the now $1.6 billion transferred to London, and then he doesn't get in trouble. And I was talking to Max Kaiser today. He said, look, this is just going to signal a new level of stealing going after segregated accounts. So, A, where is it all headed? And then, B, going back, what is News Corp from your deep research and understanding? What is it? More of a mafia organization? And then tie it in to the host that took over Larry King's slot that you were trying to get to when I interrupted.
Okay, that's quite a tall order. First, Corzine, who was governor of New Jersey, but he was also, you have to understand, he was the CEO of Goldman Sachs before he became governor of New Jersey. Now, why don't they go after Corzine? Why isn't he read his rights?
All right, let's go back to a few more minutes of the amazing interview I did last night on InfoWars Nightly News with Greg Palast. I mean, this is such an incredible show, the radio show, with all the guests, the callers, the news. But the TV show, I mean, it is just amazing what we do every single night. The guest, the news, the video reports. I know they're working on a whole bunch of really special stuff for tomorrow night and some surprises. But let's go ahead and go back to the point of Corzine, why he's untouchable. Listen carefully.
Why don't they go after Corzine? Why isn't he read his rights? I mean, if you shoplift, you know, if you shoplift a screwdriver from a hardware store, they're gonna read you your rights. You shoplift $1.6 billion, and they invite you to Congress to just give a chat. Why? The answer is what he has on these guys and who else is in on this stuff. Now, I got a glimpse of it. I can't get it all, you know, because I just don't have all of the roots in. But I did have a document, marked confidential, from Tim Geithner, who's our Secretary of Treasury, to Larry Summers. It's in the book Vulture's Picnic. In fact, you can see it at my site, vulturespicnic.org. It was a cable written by Geithner to Summers talking about how they were going to use the World Trade Organization to squeeze any nation that got in the way of our banks and didn't join in the deregulation fest that was going on. So how they're going to punish nations, in particular Brazil. Now, why is that important, this discussion? The answer is that Geithner told Summers, who was at that time Secretary of Treasury, now until recently was Obama's economic czar. Why did Geithner, our now Secretary of Treasury, write to Summers? He was telling him to call the top 5 bankers in America before they pulled the trigger at the World Trade Organization, because it could bring down, and did bring down, the world.
And then he goes on to list those 5 bankers. The full videos at prisonplanet.tv, and how they basically give orders because they control the private shares and the private Federal Reserve. Just like in Europe, they're going under total banker occupation. And you just heard Palast, who actually has the video of the interview on the BBC, it was like 3 years ago, with the head of the World Trade Organization admitting that the euro was meant to take over what was left of sovereignty in Europe and impoverish them economically. And I was on IMDb last night because I was trying to remember the year I put out a film, so I had to go there to remember. They had trivia of Alex Jones, and in the trivia section was quotes, and I did look at the quotes. They are some of my quotes. And one of them is, it's all out in the open. And then I did a search on that and found that it's like a joke that I say it's all out in the open. No, it's all out in the open. And that's why I'm basically to the point of tearing my own hair out. Not that there's much of it left. Okay, I'm going to go to a short clip of Greg Palast here in a moment, investigative reporter for the BBC, from a TV interview I did last night on the Nightly News, and he's going to be back on the radio show live tomorrow, getting into more of this with us. I also have Rosa Corey, who's just an amazing grad. Hasn't been around as long. He's younger, of course. He survived a plane crash and almost died a year and a half ago, but he's back and really having a big effect. The fastest growing party in the UK, and it's spreading to the European Union. He's fighting the open announcements of world government. He's going to be joining us coming up in the last 30 minutes of the show today. Best-selling author James Wesley Rawls of the new novel Survivors is going to be joining us. First time I've ever interviewed him, so I'm looking forward to that coming up. Grassroots fighter and expert on Agenda 21. And the reason I like having her on is because when I hear her talking about Agenda 21, I've done all the research separately and can confirm that she knows exactly what she's talking about and is an exciting voice, added to the mix with her experiences as a forensic realtor that fights eminent domain. So she's going to be joining us tomorrow. Nigel Farage, member of the European Union Parliament. He's kind of the Ron Paul of England. He's well known pretty much in that vein and almost as popular. The U.S., Israel, and NATO and England are staging bombings and attacks inside Iran. And you've got the head of the National Security Council, Clapper, calling for provocations with Iran. You've got the history of Cheney, Pulitzer Prize winner Cy Hirsch exposed, wanting to paint up U.S. boats like Iranian speedboats and have Navy SEALs attack U.S. ships 5 years ago. Then that came out about 3.5 years ago once Cheney left office. Cy Hirsch was too scared to publish it until he left office, and I understand why. He's the guy that in the second hour. Also, we've got new Fast and Furious news, giant news on the terror front. In fact, when I read this type of news, I've got to really, really try to just ask everybody to take a deep breath and listen to me carefully on this information. When you see media hype, when you see government hype about imminent Iranian attacks in America, and the fact that